because of the show that I do, I don't generally get to go to a car show on Friday night with my husband, and they have like 80 different cars there, and I haven't had a chance to take my Super there yet. And so we were trying to schedule a time when I could do an early show and then be able to go to the car show on Friday nights with him. And that's tonight. So I'm really looking forward to that. But I also have something really, really, really important that I was working on earlier this morning, and then when my grandson was taking a nap, and I'm dying to tell you guys about it. I don't have enough time to do it during this show, or I would do it now and just skip chapter 12 for right now. So what I think I'm going to do is I think I'm going to do an unscheduled one when we get home from the car show, because it's that important. And I say that because I want to actually do like a live dig. There's so many tentacles to this story that I would love to have a whole bunch of people that are good researchers all up on X as well as on Rumble, and see if we can't dissect this story for what it really is, because it's a crazy story. And weirdly enough, it dovetails into the show that I just did with Alpha Warrior, because there's going to be an IBM angle to it too. So stay tuned for that. I will try to come out with a time in the next couple of hours. I just don't remember what time we get back from the car show. So since I haven't went in a long time, because I do the Friday show. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. Oh, there's Stellar. Let me bring her up too for the co-host, and then we're going to get started. All right. So here we go. Chapter 12. Now, you remember the guy that we just did, and he basically, the Bowenski, had dubbed himself the Sovietology, which I said, kind of jokingly said, sounded exactly as crazy as Scientology. But anyway, he dubbed himself the Soviet expert, set up a whole course in a college in Switzerland to bona fide himself as the expert on everything Soviet. And basically, other than having been born in Poland, was not really a Soviet expert at all. But he was passed off as one, and he was used as one to create an entire propaganda campaign against the Soviet Union. Now, again, just like with COVID, if COVID's real, why do you need a propaganda campaign to convince everybody that it's real? I'm not saying communism wasn't real. It definitely was real. But if it's as evil as you say it is, why do you need a propaganda campaign to say it's evil? It literally makes no sense. And when something makes no sense, it's generally speaking a lie. That's just the way it is. So, anyway, so the female version of Bowenski is a woman by the name of Suzanne Labin, Labin. And the title of this essay is 50 Years of Anti-Communist Agitation. So here's a peek preview. She is literally the female version of Bowenski. So she was born in 1913, weirdly enough. What an odd year to be born. And died in 2001. She's largely forgotten. However, she was among the front ranks of the anti-communist professionals, many of which we've covered, like the China Lobby, Claire Chennault, his wife Anne Chennault. Those were the Chiang Kai-shek. Those were the front ranks of the anti-communist professionals, and she certainly had a front row seat as one of those activists. And she also occupied, is all along in here yet? Because he's going to love this part. She occupied the seat. Now, Bowenski was kind of positioned to be the far right version of this. She's positioned to be the far left. And again, that matters when you're producing a psychological operation, when you want everybody pushed into the third way. You have to have both versions and they have to be controlled by the same people. So, she deserves more attention to track the remarkable trajectory of her activities and to bring into sharper focus her writings on communism. This essay covers her Parisian childhood, the youngest child of a working class father who was absent and an alcoholic, and an herbalist mother who raised her alone. And again, this type of dysfunctional family is very familiar with radical people that they then use to create their agenda. The first text published by Suzanne Leben was an article that basically had to do with families and liberty. In 1939, she published this in an 8-page monthly journal that was defending pacifism because they have to first establish her bona fides as a leftist. So they do that by starting her writing in a journal that was very well known for that type of agenda. In those writings, she violently denounced the Moscow trials, provoking a deep rupture at the heart of the League of Human Rights at a Congress in 1937, with Michael Alexander and Leon Emery resigning from the League as a result of the fracture, and they were considered to have sold out to Stalinist apologists. So, in this context, along with the signing of the Nazi-Soviet pact, that they welcomed the young Suzanne Leben, who published a study in 3 installments about the culture of this fraction. The editorial note introduces is instructive in the introduction. Quote, some reproach us for our anti-Stalinism. We have indeed fought against Stalinistics, just as we have hoped to put people on guard against their duplicity and effectively denounce them as warmongers. Now that the proof is there, we will not lose any more time trampling on the corpses. But the articles that we are about to read, which form the resume of a doctrinal thesis that we were sent incidentally last July, remain the most instructive analysts of that which may yet in our time be the blindness of masses in the ideology of leaders. So again, it's critical that she establish her bona fides as being a true leftist. Her future publications, Stalin the Terrible, she deliberately included numerous quotations with the aim of revealing the extent to which Stalin personality cult was perpetuated within the Parisian intellectual scene. She was well known within a small circle of left-wing anti-communist at the beginning of the 30s. It depended on the support of Eduardo Labin, whom Suzanne married at the age of 19, in order from 1933 on to develop a network among students and to develop an audience for his review called The Critique of Society. It is obviously difficult to transpose his influence on the wife of his wife. Le Pen immersed herself in political meetings during the course of her studies. She published a study on the death penalty in the Soviet Union in June of 1940. Having strenuously denounced Stalin, she attacked the regime for its legal and repressive text, placing particular emphasis on the criminalization of children. She basically accused him of creating a country-wide concentration camp. And also criticized him using a phrase that she coined called the land of the workers, and that there was no notion of humanity in anything that was set up in the Soviet Union. Her husband was called upon to fight, but his Jewish identity of Romanian origin and his association with acts of resistance perpetuated by the group surrounding Andrei Wheel pushes the couple to immigrate to none other than Argentina, where Suzanne Le Pen spends the whole of the war. So she's in Argentina, which is where all of the Nazis enter Latin America in the towards the end of the war and in the immediate aftermath. She establishes contact there, which later proved fundamental, one of which is Octavio Gonzalez Roura, Roura. He was the co-founder of a Review Argentina publication in 1934 that was published monthly on liberty in Argentina, which sounds exactly like that peace and liberty thing that we talked about several chapters ago. It looks like it, and just a little bit of research that I did, to be a counterpart to those. In 1963, Suzanne Le Pen co-prefaced her work, my Argentina hurts. That was the name of the article. And she wrote it about Octavio and said that his democratic convictions, which are coupled with socialist inspirations, gotta love their democracy, and are of a kind that might be expressed by the Socialist Party of Argentina under the direction of his best friend, Alfredo Palacio. Le Pen also paid homage to Argentina, quote, during the Nazi war, I have had the pleasure of living in a prosperous Argentina. I remain grateful to the men and women of this magnificent country for having welcomed me and treated me with the generosity that rivals that of France, homeland to refugees from the disgrace, unquote. She goes on to start talking about the Soviet Union from Stalin to Gorbachev, saying that to track how her thinking on communism evolved over the course of several decades, it was important to look at her work throughout that entire time. The author says that there was basically 4 phases to her work. There's basically a dual emphasis on both the figure of the Soviet dictator at the time and the regime in all of her work. So she treated them like on a dual track with each other. Her education as a chemist, she understood how to distinguish between objectivity and neutrality. The first is a quality in the method of research that is necessary in order to establish the truth, regardless of the circumstances. There is no conceivable reason for the truth to always and precisely reside in a happy medium. Confusing objectivity and neutrality would amount to never allowing a black or white result and forcing a chemist to always find a gray solution. Le Pen is therefore objective, but she is not neutral. Le Ben's aim is not just to denounce Stalinism, but also to contrast it with a rational and human socialism. The author's object um, objective, is to reconstruct democracy by endowing it with a quote new form adapted to modern life, to the increase in the number of citizens, the complexity of confessions, and flowering of resources. So, in other words, she has the scientific background, as did our other guy, to write as if they're using scientific logic and arguments, when in fact they're not using that at all, but they use that education as a camouflage to pretend that they are. And it's critical that we understand that, because we have today, as part of the fifth generation warfare and propaganda, you have people that are credentialed, and they use that credentialing process to sow lies to us. And that's the reason why I thought this book was so important right now, is because I'm showing you the behind the scenes of how they do it. These people are not objective at all. They use the curtain of objectivity and credentialing of being quote unquote scientists. And that's the same thing we saw with climate change. And it's the same thing we saw with the whole green. It's the same thing we see with DEI. They credential these people, and the credentialing is so important that they then hide their agenda behind it. And again, this has been going on. This woman was doing this in 1930. So they've had a lot of time to perfect this operation. In the 1950s, Suzanne Le Ben was fully aligned with the logic of the anti-communist, anti-Stalinist left. She was a member of the section of France International, which it seems to have been, based on what I can find about it, a fairly progressive left organization. And they were firmly on the side of creating an Atlantic alliance, something that would look strangely familiar, like NATO. And again, she's coming at it with the leftist credentials. It is at this time that she attempted to create, along with Andre Benton, an anti-Stalinist cultural review whose committee of patronage would have comprised, and they go on to talk about several prominent Frenchmen, but that didn't work out too well. It is understandable, therefore, that Le Ben took an interest in the first steps of none other than the Congress of Cultural Freedom, which we learned a long time ago is a CIA front. Having played an important role in the French delegation to the inaugural conference of the Congress for Cultural Freedom that was held in West Berlin in 1950. She also had ambitions to take over the editorship for the Congress of Cultural Freedom journal in Paris, France. Her ambitions, though, were blocked at the time, but she never left the network of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. She did remain a visible part of this organization, as well as several other prominent organizations in France that bridged the gap for coordination with the right-wing anti-communist. By January of 1957, it was written that a book was written and this is what they say about the book. The book marks a change in the anti-communism of Suzanne Le Ben, with the focus on the threat to Western societies coming from communist subversion as exposed by McCarthyism. Freedom can only be safeguarded by tracking down and denouncing the three circles of the communist conspiracy, organized like the Society of Jesus. Quote, the archetypes of all conspiratorial movements with an ideological exterior from which the Bolsheviks merely copied down the recipes as they transposed them into Marxist jargon, unquote. That's what she said about it. In rabble-rousing language, she talks of sordid communities of monks and meager smidgens of clerical people mixed with communist killers. Thus, the whole edifice of the communist hold over the country is constructed on a pyramid model based on secret sections. From that point on, Le Pen maintained that the type of anti-communist populism in her work often used titles that were very provocative as far as labeling the communists as killers and things that you would expect in propaganda work. One of her titles was The Communist Conspiracy, the Totalitarian Hydra, and How to Muzzle It. She also wrote The Unrelenting War, a study of the strategy and techniques of communist propaganda and infiltration. I bet that was a great read coming from the propagandist. It says this volume is a summation of her counter subversion doctrine, one that was not so original, but was more of a synthesis of existing debates on psychological warfare. She even included a lot of military jargon in order to make it more believable that it was that she had consulted with the military and that she was talking with authority on psychological operations. Le Pen evokes neither Indochina nor Algeria in any of her arguments. Now, why would that be? At the time that all of this is happening, France, colony, Algeria, you would have called, you could have called France a whole lot of names, but she never talks about it. Her focus is strictly on the Soviet Union, not on oppression overall, because obviously the future civil war in Algeria was a direct result of the oppression of imperialism. But again, no addressing any of what's going on in Africa at all. Nothing in Indochina, because France at this point is in Vietnam doing all kinds of evil things. No talk about that at all. So it's not a principled argument. It is a propaganda argument to create credentials for State Department level and intelligence level people to say, see, here's its writing. This is how bad the Soviet Union is. Well, if you actually cared about how bad the Soviet Union is, you'd care about how bad all governments are, and you would write across the board about oppression. But she doesn't do that. Let's see. I'm skipping a little part of that because that just basically, but I do want to say this part. She explains her defense of McCarthyism, which she was compared as being the same type of person with her single focus on communist and not oppression overall. And it also says she was a huge promoter of the League of Liberty, which again has been outed as a CIA front. Intelligence overall, but specifically the CIA. And it was aligned with the US. And it's something that we've talked about before. So it's clear that she is running propaganda. She progressively oriented her attention and international circumstances only after the the how would I say that? So uh, after the war in the mid 1940s, and we're up to like the early part of the late 50s, early part of the 60s. Um, it is only after the uh, Chiang Kai shek is firmly established in Taiwan, and they want to begin villainizing China in order to communist China, in order to legitimize Chiang Kai shek's attacks on mainland China under the guise of attacking communism. Does she add the Asia aspect of it? But again, not in France occupied Vietnam, exclusively on Formosa, which of course is now Taiwan, and its relationship with China. She went on to defend and justify the American intervention in Vietnam eventually as a fight against communism, of course, while continuing to defend Formosa. She publishes a series of brochures against communist China, denouncing any prospect of diplomatic recognition, and basically um, stays focused on communism, which is, again, I just find it very interesting. Um, So Le Ben's writing describes in detail the instrument of conquest, which is the apparatus of propaganda and subversion, but only as it focuses on communism and not any of the rest of it. The author goes on and says opium is a useful tool for the communist for making money, and this is what he's quoting her, um, and recruiting agents. So again, she's one of the people that blames the spread of opium around the world on the communist, when we all know it had nothing to do with the communist, and Mao wanted absolutely nothing to do with opium, which is one of the major causes of their civil war in kicking Chiang Kai shek out. So, again, I think we've firmly established the fact that she's a propagandist. She goes on to write testimonies and gets witness statements covering the kinds of psychological manipulations present among drug addicts and hippies, so that she can further the conversation of how bad communist is because they're the ones providing the drugs. A continuing concern with communist subversion, she writes about in the 1970s, which led to her defending the regime of General Pinochet in Chile, was combined with denunciation of international terrorism and a vibrant defense of Israel. So again, because Allende was accused of being a quote unquote communist, that then gives her the justification to support Pinochet as the savior from communists, even though he goes on to slaughter tens of thousands of his own people. In terms of Le Ben's reputation and influence, the first thing to bear in mind is that her work were often translated into multiple different languages, not just French and English. She wrote a lot about Vietnam once they recharacterized the war as the stop against the communist spread. And that was at the only time when she began to cover that. She took the opportunity to highlight how she participated in conferences all over the world under the banner of League of Liberty and the International Conference on Political Warfare, an organization of which she was the president, and which formed what? The World Anti-Communist League, of course. She was intimately affiliated with the World Anti-Communist League, as well as the Committee International for Action of Society, which is abbreviated CIAS. This network was part of that peace and liberty organization, excuse me, organization that John Paul David created. So they're all one big happy family. And this, there, if you go back and look at her history, there wasn't a lot, there's mentioning of it, but the focus of her expertise was her knowledge about the communism in general. And again, I found no indication that she actually ever went to a communist country and experienced communism, but she is billed as one of the leading 1930s, 40s, and 50s expert on communism. What she was an expert on is psychological operations. So, because she wrote in multiple languages, or it was translated in multiple languages, she reached a much wider audience and influenced a lot more decision makers. Some observers did ascribe considerable influence to her. A Swiss memorandum on her activities in the 1960s viewed her as being an inspiration for Article 4 of the Constitution of France for their Fifth Republic, which compelled political parties to adopt a democratic structure and so allow for the outlawing of the Communist Party. She also was attributed with a strong influence to her in diplomatic and anti-communist circles, and insisted on the fact that she had, quote, become one of the international leaders in the struggle against communism, unquote. Another quote, Ma'am Le Pen draws a balance sheet of what democracy is, of its strengths and its weaknesses. She studies the critics who are opposed to democracy and concludes by affirming her faith in a slow but continuous progress of the human condition, unquote. She definitely could be a writer for the current crazies. Another quote says, Ma'am Le Pen, who had visited 22 nations, conveys the results of her pessimistic observation. But in looking at her travels, she didn't necessarily travel to quote unquote communist countries. What she did was travel to countries like Vietnam, where people were accused of being communist, but weren't necessarily verified, and like in Argentina and in Chile, where some leader is accused of being communist, and she shows up to write about it when in fact the person wasn't a communist at all. At a conference, one of the conferences that's part of the World Anti-Communist League on political warfare that was held in Paris in 1960, it says, the aims were to wake up the free world and alert public opinion to the lethal doctrine of democracies in the face of communism since 1945. It summons the free world to defensive and offensive political warfare against communism. And I just find interesting the wording, political warfare, because if you guys remember, that's the name of the cadre school that was set up in Taiwan, was political warfare. One of the reviewers, a guy by the name of Andre Bonican, stressed that she, quote, she was a committed socialist, and that it said that Le Pen does not hide her aversion for the communist system. Well, she was paid not to. Finally, the relations between Suzanne Le Pen and the nationalist right-wing groups deserves some attention. Le Pen did not emerge from the ranks of the right and scarcely had any points of entry despite their shared anti-communism. And the fact that she, like they, were published by several of the same authors and publications bears an interesting side note. Also, the anti-communist struggle in the name of democracy was not a mobilizing force for those circles affected by the defense of French Algeria, not a cause for which Le Pen was fighting. She ultimately would she stood out for that reason. Anybody that was during that time that this author is saying, anybody in a whole bunch of words, but anyway, anybody that was writing about right wing, what they call right wing issues at the time, all called out what was happening in Algeria. Most of the people that were on the left that wanted pacifism or whatever, or wanted neutrality, whatever the word is that you wanted, they too called out what was happening in Algeria. She never did. The most difficult aspect of Le Pen's career concerns her position on the left-right spectrum. Originally on the anti-Stalinist left, she was long associated with more aspects of the radical right. When considering the different phases of her anti-communism, from the liberation of France, the liberation of Algeria, excuse me just a second, to the Vietnam War, it is noticeable that she reflects more of an American chronology rather than a French one, because that's her boss. France is, in fact, largely absent from all of her writing, and she rarely directed her anti-communism towards the French Communist Party. Her anti-communist was always Soviet-driven until she decided to adopt China. And only adopted China, obviously, when they set up Chiang Kai-shek in Formosa. One has to wait until 1983 from the time she started in the 30s, just 50 years, no big deal, to see her denounce in a brochure the socialism of the 1980s. At that point, any legitimacy that Le Pen had was gone. Nobody actually cared about what she thought. So it was only once she was out of the limelight that she even commented on the movement of France into socialism, which I found very interesting. So that's it. The next chapter is long enough that I don't want to start it because it really needs to be done together. And it's talking about the Mont Pelerin, Pelerin Society. And it is fascinating. It's another one of those organizations that it's like the Committee of 300, all of those. You'll see some of the same people. Just very interesting how there's all of these organizations that most of us has never heard of, but they overlap all of the people and other organizations that are behind all of this. So we will start there. That's chapter 13 on Monday. So let's open it up and see if anybody has anything to chat about the lesson. And then I'm going to discuss what I want to do an open dig on sometime either tonight or tomorrow morning. Ron, go ahead.
You mentioned McCarthy. And, for the longest time, I've believed that McCarthy's crusade was legitimate. And I'm, questioning everything. What is your stance on McCarthy in this whole thing? Was that just a charade, or was that a legitimate a crusade on his part to try to expose things for, like, the Patriots?
So I've read both accounts. Both accounts have very valid arguments. The psychological operations of, and it could be that he was maneuvered into a position based on planted people with quote unquote communist ties that did concern him, so that he may have been legitimately looking at it, but it was all a psychological operation to scare us of communists. So I I think it would be very hard to personally know. I've never seen a smoking gun that says that he was part of the psyops. What he was doing was 100% part of a psyops. Whether he was witting or unwitting is the only question. It was all done to terrify people that we were going to be invaded by the Soviet Union. And there was literally no evidence of that at all.
That makes sense, and that well, I don't want to get too far off, but McCarthy was there during Eisenhower. Do you attribute Eisenhower as part of a master puppet in this?
100%. Well? Eisenhower, okay. He knowingly was. He not only was the overarching senior military member in the immediate aftermath of World War II in the European theater as they began the initial iterations of setting up Gladio, which was happening at the time, because not only did they have to camp all of the people they were going to smuggle out in special camps, that, as a matter of fact, Galen and Otto Skorzeny, Galen and Otto Skorzeny describe the place where they were put was basically a castle. They were not, and it's not described that way in most historical books. They talk about them being confined by the Army's counterintelligence organization for quote unquote interrogation. They were never interrogated, number one. And they were talked to. They were never interrogated like the rest of them. And they were not in one of the normal camp buildings. They were in a very special place most of the time. And then supposedly Otto Skorzeny escaped a couple of times when he didn't actually escape at all. He was allowed to travel because he was going around finding all of the people that they wanted in that particular camp in order to be protected as part of the initial cadre of the B&D to set up this entire worldwide network of Gladio units. So that was all oversaw by Eisenhower. And there's no way that went on and him not know about it. Because the entire army apparatus that was in Europe at the time was part of it. As a matter of fact, there was some competition at the very senior level of who was going to get what assets as far as the Nazis between them and the Brits. So again, there's no way he didn't know any of that was happening. There was senior level interaction between him and Allen Dulles. Where'd they get the 4-star Army uniform to dress up Galen to bring him to the United States? Again, exactly. There's no way they didn't know.
Okay, one final question in relation to Eisenhower then, because he gets so much praise for warning everybody about the military-industrial complex. Do you think that was genuine, or do you think that was bullshit?
No, he was bragging about what he had just done.
That's exactly what I thought. All right, we're on the same page. So, all right.
Yeah. SR-71, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank everybody for attending and those on Rumble. For this quick session with the Colonel, we all love it. But I'm listening to the story behind this woman, Suzanne Ben. And it seems that, to me, she wasn't really recruited. Everything she did was self-motivated. From a certain standpoint, from getting involved and going forward with what's going on. Is that correct?
So that is the impression that you get. And here's one of the interesting aspects of this. You can be recruited in multiple different ways. So if you get to people early enough in their life, especially these people from dysfunctional households, you can mold by just being present certain aspects that you plan on using them for. And that's why all of these youth programs are so important to the intelligence community, because as they administer these youth programs, they find out who are from dysfunctional families. Again, they're psychologically traumatized as a result of that, and therefore can be more easily guided to a destination. And you know, if you sat down and told somebody that, hey, I have this plan for you, and you're going to be famous, and I want you to do X, Y, and Z. And in this case, it's right about exclusively about the Soviet Communist Party. Um, you're not necessarily going to get somebody to go along, but if you do all of those same things under the auspices of a mentorship, and you praise them every time that they write something like that, and it gets published because of you behind the scenes, you can see how you germinate these people to do exactly what you want. Then at some point, somebody is going to take her to the side and say, yeah, you're not allowed, if you want this all to continue and you want to continue to travel and go to all these meetings and stuff, you're not allowed to talk about French Algeria. You're not allowed to talk about French Vietnam. And they're happy to do that because they love what they're doing and they love the accolades that they're getting. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Colonel. That makes absolute sense. Self-aggrandizement.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really sad if you think about that in total, but that's exactly why they have to control these youth programs. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, Colonel, it's my contention, let me know what you think, that Eisenhower's speech that everyone points to was actually like a commercial against the U.S. military in order to move people into other ways of quote unquote defending America, i.e., the CIA. And it was just like a portrait of that, you know, he's a good guy. Maybe he's thinking about, you know, saving all the soldiers and, you know, just move everything into the covert land of the CIA, you know, soft power stuff. What do you think?
So he doesn't talk about the military per se. He talks about the military industrial complex. That has nothing to do with the military. So I don't agree with that assessment. He's talking about the Lockheeds, the Martin Mariettas, all of the Raytheon, Brown and Root. He's talking about the military industrial complex. And he is supposedly warning us about them in that speech. Yet, when you look at the military industrial complex and his contributions in order to be president, there's a direct correlation to who sponsored him into the presidency and that military industrial complex. So, no, I don't think he was demonizing the military. I think he was saying that basically there's this thing and you need to be careful of it. And that's their way of telling you exactly what they're going to do. And they did exactly what they said. They were going to basically dominate and control the United States of America as a military industrial complex and grow to be the behemoth thing that they are today. Eisenhower could have at any time confronted that military industrial complex if he had wanted to. He didn't because they put him in office.
One more question. Within the speech, I've heard reports that it wasn't just the military-industrial complex. It was the military-industrial congressional complex. And somebody made him take out the congressional.
Well, I think that doesn't, to me, that's a distinction without a difference. You don't have a military industrial complex without Congress. They have no money unless Congress appropriates the money. So that is a given. You don't have to actually say, hey, it's all Congress's fault that all of this money from Congress is going to the military industrial complex, because it's all has to be appropriated and authorized in order to go to the military industrial complex. So to me, that's a distinction without a difference. It may be important to other people to have that word in there, but not if you understand how the process works. Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to say, in furthering what you said about bragging, you look at the military-industrial complex. Where was that really created, and who was in charge of the military, and specifically the War Industry Board, both for World War I and World War II, was Bernard Baruch. And Bernard Baruch was the guy who was really closely tied with Marshall and with Eisenhower, and he's the one who essentially made Eisenhower to be the commander in Europe, to be the overall commander in Europe. You got to realize that when at the beginning of World War II, Eisenhower was like a lieutenant colonel. I mean, he shot up right immediately through the ranks, and Baruch, I'm getting ready to kind of really do a real deep dive on World War I and Baruch's involvement with that, but he was in charge of the War Industry Board for both World War I and World War II, and was essentially the presidential advisor. He's the one who made sure that Wilson got elected. He was there for FDR. He was there, and he was also there with Eisenhower. So, Baruch is a main player in here. But JFK's primary guy that he talked to all the time was Bobby Kennedy. Well, the Eisenhower's closest advisor to him was his brother Milton, who was basically, I don't know if he was a card carrying communist or a fellow traveler, but either way, he was absolutely a globalist in nature, and he was the one who was in Eisenhower's ear the entire time. So I agree with your sentiment that it was bragging, and I think that what he was doing there was more of a kind of a reputation saver for, like, because everybody looks at Eisenhower today with this look at what he tried to warn us about, and as a good thing. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox there, but that's I agree with your statement.
Yeah. And many of the people do that. They will say something after the fact, like, oopsie, here's what I did. And it comes off as a warning when in fact they knowingly did what they did, and they want to save for posterity some, oh my gosh, be careful, this might have happened, while they actually know that they did it. So anyway, lone traveler.
Thank you, Colonel. Hi, Ron. I actually have a question that, we know that the globalists helped Mao Zedong to gain the power in China. We know that they actually tried to assassinate Chiang Kai-shek. So basically, in 40s, they handed the victory to Mao Zedong, even though they told us how bad the communism is, but actually, I think they are their puppies. So in 1957-ish or 54, Zhou Enlai talking about the modernization of China. So when I was young, I heard about this full modernization of China, so many times. I'm just wondering, do you have any information that, American government or the so-called deep state is actively helping China to modernize and also moving the wealth to China? Do you have any information regarding this? So I have been wondering about this for a very long time, but I don't have any, tangible that I can dig into. So I'm wondering if you have anything that you can talk about.
So if you go back and you look at the evolution of China, you're going to find companies like L'Oral, Loral, that during the Clinton administration um, provided technology, and they're not the only one. They are one of many, provided technology that was illegally provided to China about launch vehicles and the space program. That's the business that L'Oral was in. L'Oral was found guilty of passing technology to China, and they made billions of dollars doing it, and they were, I think it was like 21 or $20 million fine, which was penny. It wasn't even 1% of the money that they made doing it. So it's hardly even a deterrent. That's like, a bribe, if you will, in the end result. And oh, by the way, that money, when you're fined, that money goes to a slush fund that they use for their own pet projects. It's just another money laundering opportunity. So there is evidence that with presidential knowledge, because there's a whole bunch of connections of L'Oral with the Clintons, that technology was passed illegally to China. There's also other countries that participated in the modernization of China, one of which was Israel. Israel also provided China with technology that they couldn't otherwise get. Israel is oftentimes used as a cutout both for the US and the UK in order to do things that they can't get caught doing. So there's that plausible deniability that the use, and that was illustrated in the Iran-Contra, where Israel was used as a cutout to get missiles to Iran. They were used as a cutout to get weapons to Angola via South Africa. So you can't just look at the United States in looking for information about that particular topic. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just heard a report along those lines, what you were just talking about, that Germany was blocked by the U.S. in giving Ukraine. I don't remember the name of the weapon. Sorry, because there are parts of the weapon manufactured by the U.S. and they can block people selling them to other countries selling them to other countries, or giving them, or anything, to other countries, which I was really shocked. I was like, really?
Well, they've always been able, here, technically there's not anything they can do, just FYI, but in the contract, in order to buy dual technology or single military technology from us to any other country, to include NATO or whatever, you have to sign an agreement that you won't forward that technology to other countries unless the US approves it. And that's a stipulation of the purchase. But if Germany was to sell that weapon system or donate it, whatever you want to call that, to the Ukraine, there's literally nothing the United States can do. Are we going to bomb Germany? No. Are we going to sanction them? Maybe. Are we going to put the company on some kind of list? Generally not. And in the cases that I'm aware of, that something like that, where the company was fined for doing that, they just build that into the sales price of the equipment that they're selling to that third country. And that's not even to that doesn't even go to the whole conversation of the siphoning off of weapon systems that are on the black market and God knows who has them. So that's all kind of uh, a nebulous thing. Lone Traveler, go ahead.
The Hillary, when she was visiting China, she brought a laptop full of those high tech and left those laptop in the hotel room while they, going to visit other places.
Yep.
And also her server basically is selling those advanced technology and make millions, if not billions of dollars.
Yep.
And also you're absolutely right. The Israel is in part of this. I remember in 2011-ish that they are shipping like 69 of the Patriot missiles to China, and they got caught in one of the Northern European ports. So they are basically doing that. I just more interested in the in earlier 50s, 60s, 70s. I know that Rockefeller was visiting China in 70s and praising the Chinese government, how good they are. So I just wondering if there's something I can dig in, to get more information about that. But, talking about at that time and then in the past, and I see some of the news came out recently in the last few weeks. I started wondering that something deeper happening. We know that all this information sent to China in 90s, 2000, the Chinese were developing according to these designs. And we see a lot of copycats in the 10 years ago. But in the past couple years, now we say they have totally brand new weaponaries, like their fighter jet are way bigger, carrying more things, have a longer range.
Right.
And also, the drone technology. I started wondering that the entities that is happening in the United States before switched their sides. Maybe they are moving to China and Russia, hoping then design the new weaponry, and we are like a decade behind now. I'm wondering if you have any information or any thought on that. Basically, the people or the entity or the whatever that is, helping American people, they stopped doing that more than 10 years ago. They already went to China and hoping then to develop the new weaponry and start to fight the deep state in America. I think Trump is also on their side, not on the side of the deep state in this country. I don't know if you have any thought of that.
Trump is definitely not on the deep state side. I don't have any information on any of the earlier exchanging of technology. That's not to say, one of the things, again, if you zoom out on all of this information, which I do occasionally in order to try to make sense of it. So the international syndicate, what you referred to as the deep state, always has to have a boogeyman. When the Soviet Union collapsed and it was the boogeyman, they moved on to radical Islam because China was not far enough along as a threat in order to just move from one communist threat to another. And I think they would have preferred that, but there was nothing to China at the time as far as a threat outside of China. During that same time, the intelligence services, primarily the CIA, was surrounding China in an effort to attack them from within using stay-behind units. They took Tibetans out of China, flew them into Colorado, trained them how to be terrorists to attack China from the inside. So while that's going on, I don't think they were necessarily trying to help China become a near competitor at that time. I think they probably had their sights set on overthrowing Mao and installing a friendly dictator that they controlled, much like they were trying to do with Chiang Kai-shek. And why they kept him, they moved him to Formosa, changed the name of the island to Taiwan, and they gave him the other 7 islands along the coast of China. And for the next 40 years, after he declared martial law in Taiwan, used those islands with American weaponry to attack China. The same thing happened in Nepal, where the CIA went into the Uyghur community of Muslims and exported certain ones of them to Nepal and trained them to attack from inside of China. And so, again, this is going on during the time that we're now transitioning over to radical Islamists as the boogeyman. Then, once we're outliving the usefulness of radical Islamic terrorists, you transition now during this time where they've now decided that they're going to, with the technology from things like from the 90s on, with L'Oreal and many of these other companies, and Apple and everybody moving all of their money to China in industrial ways, we consciously made a decision that we're going to do business with the very philosophy that we just spent the last 50 years demonizing. No one does that. No one does that has a rational freaking brain. You don't go set up businesses in China if you actually think that it's a communist country and it's evil. You just don't do that. But we did that. Why did we do that? For obvious reasons. We are wanting to build them up as a near competitor, because at some point the radical Islamist thing, just like the Soviet Union, is going to dissipate, and we're going to need to perpetuate this terrorist capability and have someone as a boogeyman to blame. To me, that's what everything points to. But that's kind of an overview of information that I have gathered along the way, with a little bit of opinion inserted into that based on patterns that I've observed. Ron, go ahead.
I just wanted to address Traveler. There's some stuff out there. I think in 1957 there was a collaboration between MIT and I think it's Hsinchu University, where they were training Chinese scientists for nuclear and aerospace. And then in the 60s, I think there was a COCOM loopholes. Basically, they were allowing technology to go from the United States to China through through third-party sources like Switzerland, very likely Israel. You also had the Rockefeller Foundation and agricultural tech that was going on during the 50s and 60s. So there is a substantial amount of information out there that you can find. And Traveler, I'll actually contact you directly and send that information to you that I've kind of pulled up.
Thanks. Beam Worthy.
Yeah. Hey. I wanted to say about communism, between the world wars, and before that, I guess a little bit, but it was basically, from my understanding, it was a lot more popular, and I think there were efforts later on, maybe in the 70s or 80s or something like that, with the Catholic Church cooperating in sort of anti-communist things. But the same old Catholic Church actually, I think, was very much sympathizers in the early 20th century. And so, I like to trace back. I've been doing tons of historical study just on my own here, and I have some literature and philosophy that helps with that, especially the literature. And so just looking at the history of a lot of wars that basically up until World War II, there had just been lots of wars. I mean, they were increasing in severity and casualties and things like that with technologies. But really the globalism, the whole global scene began right just before Protestantism. And I think that the religious aspect kind of masked a lot of the political and economic real concerns that were truly at the heart of a lot of the conflicts through all of that. I don't know, 400 years. And like, what is colonialism? It's like, having power over other areas, but like then you have justifications for that. Who knows? Maybe God wants you to conquer the world, but then after World War II, like as this author Santayana laments, like kind of peace and like let's never let that happen again. Only lasted for a few short years, and he was living in Italy, that author at the time, and it's like he saw like the powers kind of like fighting over even British and American, as you guys mentioned. But yeah, you'd have to have like a reason to like do Tocqueville's like I guess actual prediction of having the U.S. and Russia be such superpowers and basically dominate Europe, which he did predict 100 years before that. And but basically, you have to have like what you were saying, a boogeyman, right? You have to have different things, like there's some evil thing or there's some bad thing, and we have to protect you from. So I guess like that. I don't know, the huge contentiousness between communism and capitalism. I don't know. It's like, I guess in a way, I think it's like inept and unimaginative and blockhead. Sort of nimwit politicians that only want to feed us, like Santayana says, ideas. They want to feed us on like happy ideas or some promises or nonsense, and so they can't make a vision of like getting people together, making societies, organizing societies based on like I guess cooperation, like above the table, and instead it's like all this patronizing stuff, endlessly basically talking down to us and trying to make us like the imaginary stuff they throw in front of us, and then them giggling whenever we peck at it, the fodder.
That's a great way of saying it. Although I think you made a comment about the colonialism being a good thing. I don't necessarily think colonialism.
Oh, I didn't say that. I didn't even say that anyway.
Okay. When you were talking about the interjection of religion in it, and maybe God wants us to do that.
Oh, that was sarcasm. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. All right.
I should have more overtone on that.
Okay. All right.
No, so yeah, it was just like that was
okay.
like what people kind of thought of those wars as. Like, but a lot of that was about international stuff, and a lot of it was fought sort of on the high seas, because Spain said we're going to have the whole world under our Catholicism, and then everyone else was up north was like, hey, no, we're going to do Protestantism, and we would totally not abide by that.
Yeah. And it's interesting, as we've noted many times, the use of a religion, because they've all been infiltrated at this point, during the acquisition or overthrow of the Queen in Hawaii, that was done by Protestant ministers that had moved there to supposedly spread the word of God, but they got a little interested in owning sugar plantations and got more involved in capitalism than they did in religion. And once the sugar wars had started, they decided that they didn't have and to your point about the workers being instead of them caring about taking care of the workers and making sure that all boats were lifted. They had, it was outrageous. The percentage of, it was well over 50% of the population of Hawaii at the time were Chinese, basically enslaved, working on the sugar plantations for these quote unquote ministers to make a lot of money. And so when
it reminds me that there was a slave collar owned by a deacon in like the 3rd century or 4th century.
Yeah. Probably. So when they decided that the queen, who had recently ascended to the throne, decided that she wanted all boats lifted, and she had to be gotten rid of course. And she wanted to give everybody the right to vote. Well, that would have screwed all of the people that were in charge, because there were more Chinese there on the island at the time than anybody else. And they saw their whole world crumbling. There was some sugar price fixing that was being done in the United States. And because they were not considered part of the United States, they weren't going to be on the inside and beneficiaries of the price fixing. And so they went to, they literally traveled to meet with the Secretary of State with a plan to overthrow the Queen. The Secretary of State approved the plan. They went back, and this is like in 1899, in the first couple of years of the 1900s, they went back and overthrew the Queen. So that has been going on for a very long time. So let's get to the other.
Oh, sorry, real briefly, just like the history of South Africa, especially on the Boer Wars, is like extremely instructive, I think. Like,
yeah, we've talked about the Boer Wars a lot, because that was the origin of the stay behind Operation Gladio. That is kind of the gist of everything that we talk about here. Yeah, you're right. They're very, very important to this whole conversation. SR7.
Can I please just say one more thing? Because I'm just dying to. It's just like I just think that the World War II is that was a transition, and things like really did change like after that, and so it's like a paradigm shift, and like colonialism kind of retracted, and it's just we really should retrace that because that's the beginning of like all these. It's the origin of a lot of these causes of conflicts and all the stuff we're dealing with.
So it didn't retract; it just masked itself. It masked itself behind the IMF, the World Bank, and organizations like the World Wildlife Fund. They were never going to allow the freedom in Africa at all. The colonialism has never stopped. That's why they continue to overthrow governments. They just mask the way they did it because the way they were doing it was too obvious. So just I wanted to throw that out there.
Operation Gladio.
Yes.
Operation Gladio.
SR71, go ahead.
Sorry.
SR71.
Thank you, Colonel. And boy, today's conversation is on fire. What can I tell you?
It is.
What getting back to technology and what's going on, and people forget, I retired from IBM, and if you haven't seen the episode with Colonel Towner and War Hamster on supercomputers, I highly recommend it if you're an IT buff. Okay? I lived through this. I was part of it. We trained the Chinese. We sent them equipment. We did the whole shebang. So to listen to somebody say, well, they steal our technology, the answer was no. We did it willingly.
Yep.
Okay? We gave it to them.
Yep.
They're not stealing it. And of course, like anybody else and any other human, these people are highly intelligent. People are smart. They're not dumb. They're smart all over the world. So I highly recommend you go watch that and take a look at where China is today concerning supercomputers, what they have, what they're capable of, what we've got, what we're capable of, and you're going to find out there's not a place you can hide if you're on the grid, period. Thank you.
Sure. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I've said this before in your space. It's my contention that actually communism was built by the British Fabian Society. And Marx was just like a pawn, just like a psyop, That's all I learned to say.
Well, to that point, I mean, we've covered this multiple times and talked about it. That is the assertion that Anthony Sutton makes. It's well documented that Bolshevikism and communism came along after Bolshevikism. The actual Bolshevik Revolution was funded by the City of London and New York City at 120 Broadway. He does an excellent job of documenting that. So there's that. And that's, again, we've talked about that a lot. For some reason, my computer is not charging. There we go. All right. Who's next? Lone Traveler, go ahead, and then we'll go to Ron.
Yeah, thank you so much. Indeed, Anthony Sutton wrote a book or stuff in 90s, I think 80s or 90s. He was the one talking about the Chinese was helped by the Jewish families, and I actually have a slightly different view of the Eisenhower. I think he was at the end of his presidency, he told us what's really going on. He probably unwillingly or maybe willingly helped, but in the end, he understands what's really going on. I view every country basically controlled by the same group of people. On left-hand side, right-hand side, they always use this two sides, like you said, a bogeyman, to play this game so that we all will willingly to give our money to them to build this military industrial complex. So they can say, oh yeah, because the enemy out there, so we need to have a strong military, we have to have strong weaponry, we have to do this and that. So they made us, to believe that we have to give so much money to them, charging taxes, paying a lot of taxes, so we can be safe. This they are playing on our fear. They are using this fear as a great tool. But the Chinese actually controlled by them, Russian controlled by them, American controlled by them. So they are using this to do the whole thing. But I just want to say, America many years ago, they planned to transfer the wealth to China, transfer all the technology to China. They want to make China the next America. The reason is because American baby boomer is going to retire. They are getting old. They have so much money. They have to steal all this money, send to China, and then destroy this country. And this country cannot getting anything back because we are behind. We are too old. We already emptied everything emptied by them. I think that was their plan many, many years ago. And then they follow through this plan, but in the middle of it, like in 2013, in China, things started to change. I think the white hat take over in China just totally destroyed their plan. That's what we're seeing in the last 10 years. Their plan got destroyed. They are hoping Chinese will fight American, hopefully take down this country, but the Chinese was not doing it. And also the Xi Jinping and Trump are working together to just telling people what's really going on and just totally destroying the financial system, the world financial system, destroy the dollar system, destroy everything. So that's what we're saying now. That's what I believe. Thank you.
You're welcome. Ron, go ahead.
I think it's important to understand, I think communism is a term that we use in the United States and certainly in the West, kind of as a boogeyman word. But, I've talked to many people who emigrated from the former Soviet Union, and they don't refer to what the type of government that they lived under as communist. They refer to it as socialist. And I mean, if you look at what the USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republics, they kind of is in their name. There were
we lost. Hold on. You.
I'm sorry. I had an incoming call. My apologies.
Okay.
But I want your thoughts on that. Is communism a boogeyman word that they used for us to keep us in fear while they were essentially operating under a different system or a similar system over there? What's your thoughts on that? I hope I articulated my question correctly. And one last thing, Traveler. I've actually talked to Traveler. Traveler is actually from China, and he has a very unique perspective that none of us really could possibly understand because we're not Chinese or Americans for the most part. So don't just categorically reject a lot of the things that he says. He's actually experienced some of these things. So with that, I'll let you.
Well, first of all, he didn't say anything that I haven't already said, except for the portion where he was talking about the international syndicate moving wealth to China until it got derailed. That is the only thing that has never come out of my mouth. Everything else he said, I've said before. So he's dead on as far as the way all of the history points to what has gone on as far as what he just articulated. So that's number one. Number two, I think every concept that we've ever been taught has to be reevaluated. Now, one of the things, and where'd Bridget go? Oh, she got knocked down too. They keep messing with my co-host. Bridget can definitely vouch for what I'm about to say, because after about 6 months, which would have been about 2 years ago, in the yeah, cousin it's in the audience too. She can definitely vouch for this. One of the uh, video conversations that we had was, what the hell is communism? Because we had come across about our sixth country, one of them being Allende, Chile, one of them being the Congo, when all of the literature that is approved literature said 100% Lumumba's a communist. Same thing with Allende. And when you go back and you look at what they were actually doing, not what was being described in Western literature of a name, not a single thing they were doing was communism as you and I've been taught what communism is. And again, for clarification, communism is the ownership of all means of production and the entire economy. It is a controlled economy. And you have to look at that in contrast to a couple of the other forms of government that also was set up during the same time frame, like totalitarianism or fascism, which was set up where all of the oligarchs, the international syndicate, all own the business, and the dictator in the form of a Mussolini or Hitler runs the government. And the oligarchs basically fund who they want to take charge, and they may or may not fake elections. That's optional. If people get too crazy, they'll just take over the elections, and they may or may not have them at all. And that's being shown to you in Ukraine right now. And so the installed dictator has the apparatus, the national police, the intelligence, and all that other stuff in order to disappear you. So the ultimate penalty of not going along with this is death. And so that's fascism, totalitarianism, or whatever. So if you set those things aside and you look at socialism, socialism is more of a kind of a kindler, gentler, if you will, inclusive piece as it's described in a textbook. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it's a good thing. Don't put words in my mouth. Then communism. It still requires a strong man in order to make the apparatus work. So it is definitely on the scale way down the line towards total government. But there's a certain amount of say that workers have in a socialist kind of apparatus. Now, having defined all of that, let's move to one of the examples. One of the best examples of this in practical use is what was happening in places like Guatemala and Nicaragua, where the people were free to do whatever they wanted to do, to the extent that as a colony, because a lot of those were Spanish colonies and other colonies at some point. So the workers had their own little plot of land because it was more of a socialist kind of government at the time, and they farmed and they sold whatever extra they had. So along comes a democracy, and the democracy allowed for elections, and they had a guy who very much wanted to allow the people to have unions to represent themselves. They wanted the workers to be paid a decent, quote unquote, living wage. You know, all of the things that the people in the Democrat Party here say they're really for, except for they're not really for any of that. All of those things were taking place. The problem was that the old system was basically owned by a lot of the oligarchs from the United States, like the Rockefellers in United Fruit, some of the mining concessions, the processed food like PepsiCo that we found in Chile, ITT, their telephone, a lot of the utilities, the electric utilities, the railroads, they were all owned by the United States. And the United States was not going to allow actual workers' rights, because the whole reason they went down there and moved banana production. Why didn't we have banana farms up here? We've got tropical things in Florida and stuff like that. Well, we can't have them here because they actually were pretending to allow unions here. And they had to set up this utopia of what a quote unquote democracy looks like here. So when they go around the world and they say, yes, there's a democracy in Taiwan when there was not, it was martial law, or there's a democracy in Guatemala when there was not, they've already programmed you to believe what a democracy is. And so, yes, there's unions, but the unions were controlled through the slush fund, eventually created under National Endowment for Democracy. All of the unions through AFL-CIO was infiltrated down there. They weren't allowed to actually have unions. Any actual union that was going to take on United Fruit was immediately, the heads of them were murdered. We went through stories after stories after stories. And so when you look at all of the things that would allow for a socialist anything to happen, they were all attacked. If you look at anything that would have actually allowed for a communist government to take hold in any of those countries, it was attacked. But so was the actual democracies. Anybody, and in the case of Vietnam with Ho Chi Minh, he actually brought a copy of the Declaration to the meeting in Paris because he wanted to set up a republic much like ours, and he was laughed at. Same thing happened with Lumumba when he came to the United States and tried to work with the United States State Department, Vice President, and President Eisenhower and Nixon. He was laughed at. They were not interested in actually setting up republics or democracies anywhere in the world. They were interested in setting up things they controlled that doesn't look anything like that. And so the distinctions between socialism and communism and Bolshevikism, as they have played out around the world, the bottom line to all of that, that's a long way of saying it, is if they controlled it, then it was going to be allowed to exist in whatever form it was, because Bolshevikism was controlled by the City of London and New York City. Now, there was some interesting, very significant changes that happened, which transformed Bolshevikism to the term communism when Stalin came along. And there's a lot more to be explored in that transition. But if you go on the definition of our government and their designation of people like Allende and Guatemala, Nicaragua, and the Congo as being a communist government, it defeats the whole purpose of the label of communist, because none of them were. And so you really have to go back and write down an objective criteria of what communism actually consists of, because China is not communist from that perspective. They do not have a 100% government controlled economy. They have a very interesting mixture of the two. And the same thing was true in the old Soviet Union, even before it fell. You had people who owned things in the old Soviet Union. Now, they had to be in a club. Most people refer to as a mafia. But it is a very interesting dynamic that I think no one that I've seen has done an honest assessment of what the government actually functioned as, because we have had the slippery slope of labels in order to create a boogeyman. And there's just no set agreement on what all of that stuff is. And I now call into question all of it. SR7. Hold on, Ron.
Tell you that's the best. That's the very best explanation I've ever heard ever. So I want to compliment you on that.
Thank you. That was a very long one. I try to be more succinct. SR71, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel. Let Lone Traveler go, and then I've got a question from Mother Goose over on Rumble.
Okay. Traveler, whoever that is, go. Oh, Lone Traveler.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Colonel. Thank you so much, SR. The communism in the textbook, when we were young, we're taught, again and again, that communism, socialism is actually pre-communism. The socialism in the textbook, they said it is because it's a backward productivity forces, or the efficiency is not there yet. People have to work. So we have to listen to government, follow their orders to do all the productions. They will tell us what company to have, what to produce, and how much every month and every year. So basically, the central government plan everything out. Everything will be rationed when they don't have enough stuff. And later on, the Chinese in 93, they called this, poor stage of socialism. They call it the primary stage of socialism. And to my surprise, actually, they moved from that primary stage of socialism to socialism actually pretty fast. In my lifetime, actually, we saw that the China actually get into so advanced, so full of the material and the product. But of course, not everybody has the a privilege to enjoy all that the production yet. So the communism, we do not believe that, at least for Chinese, I don't know about the Russians, but for the Chinese, we think it's a pipe dream, because they are talking about when communism comes, nobody needs to work anymore. Actually, we only work when we want to. That's the communism stage of the whole society. That's what we think. So that's why we say the reality. We just think, no, that's never going to happen in our lifetime. But to my surprise, I actually think we are getting very, very close nowadays. With AI, with robotic technology, we are actually pretty close to it. But it's not the way we're thinking at this moment. At this moment, we're thinking the communism is the pushing LGBT, pushing the left liberal ideas. That's a communism we believe. But actually, the true communism to Chinese in their textbook is basically you don't need to work anymore. You just do whatever you like. Everything will be provided to you. It's a very surprising, very strange word, to be honest. Anyway, I just landed here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. SR71.
Thank you, Colonel. Mother Goose has a question over on Rumble, and she wants to know your thoughts on how Albright, who was under Clinton, helped facilitate the transfer of nuclear tech to North Korea.
That's a whole show. That's a very interesting whole nother conversation. So I'm going to say this about that. I don't think the North Korea was anything that we were taught it was. I think that North Korea was, and I base this going back on the history of the entire setup of North Korea, the post World War II, all of the stuff that happened, the race up into China, Chiang Kai-shek's involvement in all of that, the partitioning off of Korea was done intentionally by the United States. And I think that over time, that the intelligence agencies controlled what was going on in North Korea. However that happened, I think it was clearly illustrated when Barack Obama told Trump two things: don't hire General Flynn and don't talk to North Korea. And to me, along with a whole bunch of other stuff that I don't have time to get into right now, it's clear that they wanted to have a nuclear capability, access to a nuclear capability. And I think that's what was set up in North Korea. And I think that's why it was closed and isolated, and only a few select people were ever allowed to travel there, and why it was so demonized, and isolated as a result of that, because they were doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. However that was set up, that's what I believe. And I think that Trump's discussions with the North Koreans derailed all of that. Much like Lone Traveler was talking about what's going on behind the scenes with China right now, there was in the first term a lot of going on behind the scenes with North Korea. And I do believe that the blowing up of their nuclear capability in that mountain had a lot to do with that. It was basically disabling a capability that the intelligence organizations had that they should have never had access to. But anyway, Illini, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel, it is worth noting that, in China, when Jack Ma, criticized the CCP, I think it was just relatively minor criticisms. I think he wound up, disappearing for, several months there. Yep. And it was basically instructed to, avoid talking about politics.
Right.
It's a very, you can empathize with some of the ideals of some of their politics, but it's not a freer society than the United States. They have mass surveillance. They've got their own thing going on.
So I'm not advocating for communism. I want to clarify that. But what I find interesting, Illini, is you're not making a very good argument for your point. I don't disagree with your point, but saying that they have mass surveillance when we're sitting in one of the most surveilled countries in the world, and telling me that they temporarily disappear people when we had an entire over 1,000 people disappeared into jails in solitary confinement because they paraded in front of or walked into the Capitol. I don't think you made your point.
Sure. Well, people feel more comfortable criticizing the government here, even during the Biden. People were. We basically had to rely a little bit on our Second Amendment rights.
But do we? See, that's another thing that I think that's totally ridiculous too. Not only do we not really have a Second Amendment, and the Brady Bill has a lot to do with that. And it was a result of a gunshot to Reagan, which, was part of all of this whole bullshit. You have to ask permission from the government to actually buy a gun. They can put you on a list that doesn't allow you to own a gun. Not all of the January 6 people have gotten their gun rights back because they're still mysteriously on a list that says they're not allowed to have a gun. And a lot of the states have enacted red flag laws. We did here in Florida as a result of the high school shooting down there. So we rest our head on the pillow at night, patting ourselves on the back that we have a Second Amendment right. And they've done almost everything they can, except for taking it away, which they can never do, to limit the ability of what your Second Amendment rights are. And I find it, again, I'm just messing with you, and you know that.
Isn't the CCP also running strategy of tension here? I mean, like Eric Swalwell, had a Chinese spy as his girlfriend. When you visit UC Berkeley, You know, the Chinese, I forget, but there's this Chinese funded bookstore over there.
Oh, absolutely.
It's always talking about the latest DEI thing, you know.
Absolutely. But I just find it ironic, of course, that every time that China does it here, it's because they're communist. But every time we do it to China, it's because we're a democracy. Because we do all the same things.
Yeah, if we're training Tibetan, you know, foot soldiers to go back and run paramilitary operations inside of China.
Could you imagine China being caught doing that here? Right?
Yeah, that would be problematic.
So,
but, you know, like, all I'm saying is we need to make sure it doesn't necessarily go in that direction, and you know, the CCP is kind of its own beast in this mix.
I know, and I just think it's the irony here just reeks. Obviously, yeah, and not just with the Tibetans. We did it with the Uyghurs too. But China's bad. Just keep telling yourself China's bad. And as long as you can be telling yourself China's bad, you don't look at your own government. And I think that has a lot to do with it. All right, let's see. All along, you haven't had a, and then we'll go to some of the people who spoke before. Go ahead, all along.
Hello. Yeah, Colonel, based on your kind of implicit comparison of like freedom China and freedom here, or really just, you know, freedom here, I think it's important to understand like the relationship between the Bill of Rights and media, and what that media permits and what that media doesn't permit over a long period of time. You know, because look at examples like, you know, my favorites. I know you've heard me blather about them once or twice before, but Allard Lowenstein, you know, the one-time New York congressman, who is an interesting figure in his own right. I'm not saying the man is an angel. I'm saying he may have been at an early enough time where he was two-sided and then decided to take a real stand and then became dangerous. So he reopens the RFK assassination investigation in 1980 and is immediately assassinated by a former, colleague of his, as it were, when he was working for CIA and the Democrats to try to manipulate and control the Freedom Summer in Mississippi. And he was, as you know, he was part of the original draft, anyone who will beat LBJ campaign. But again, he reopened the RFK assassinations, blown away by his colleague who was literally, you can't make this shit up, being communicated to by means of dentures, implants in his teeth, 1-800-RUDE implant. Okay, and other folks like Leo Ryan, we know about him. And so what's the point? You eliminate that as topics anywhere, right? Not just among Democrats,
right?
You know, their former, but also crucially among the controlled left. And, you know, sooner or later, you might have your First Amendment, but you're going to be having a First Amendment talking about the weather and shooting each other over disagreement about the clouds.
Right. So very, very well stated. Beamworthy, go ahead. I can't hear him.
I can't hear him either. I thought it was my thing getting attacked again.
All right. Lone Traveler, go ahead. We'll bring him back up. Where did Lone Traveler, are you still with us? Guess not. Carrie, go ahead.
Hey, yeah, this is a comment about philosophy, kind of. So the Buddhists have something called the middle way. And what we're running in is the complete opposite, which we've talked about, the Hegelian dialectic. So the middle way is ignore the extremes, walk the middle way. Do not fall for these extreme blah-blahs and that's where we are. We're in the extremes, and we're socially engineered to be in the extremes. And I just wanted people to, and maybe you don't agree with me, but I wanted people to understand that this is massive social engineering that is counter to nature. It's not natural. It's not in any way natural. And I have more to say, but
Harry, do you mind if I push back on that a little bit?
It's too deep.
Go ahead, Illini.
I think this is all part of the social cycle. There's an 80-year social cycle that a lot of people on Twitter like to talk about called The Fourth Turning. It was a book that came out by Neil Howe, 35 years ago. But the idea is that every 80 years, we basically have a political crisis in the West. And you can kind of see it. I mean, people don't talk about it now because it got subsumed by World War II. But in the 1930s, we were getting taken over by people who were supporting Nazis. And there was this big party in San Francisco in 1935 where they hung a whole bunch of, Nazi German flags and welcomed a whole bunch of Germans over. The socialists were also huge, and people were, still dealing with that into McCarthyism in the 50s. The country really was at political extremes in the 1930s, and the same was true in the late 1850s and the early 1860s, and it culminated in a civil war over slavery. There were economic differences between the North and the South, but it was a fight over the status of how far slavery was going to be allowed to grow in the United States. And then 80 years before that, it was over monarchism. It was over monarchism versus, whether we were going to be a republic. And people living back then, Neil Howe will say that they thought they were living through a civil war, at least if you're in the United States. So I think some of this is there's typically political extremes at this part of the cycle, and then usually one of those two sides normally wins, and then you get a normalization in the whole process. And I think what most of us just want is the more reasonable side to win at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I don't understand how you're pushing back. How are you pushing back on what I said?
I don't think it's engineered. I think it's a natural part of the cycle. It's human beings every 80 years. We might even find that there's other animal species and stuff like that have this kind of event too.
I totally disagree with that completely.
Okay. All right. Got it. Noted. Let's go on. Lone Traveler, are you back up? I can't hear him. Can you hear him, guys? Stellar?
I can't.
Okay. All right. Beamworthy, go ahead.
I guess it's pretty far back in the conversation, but we were talking about Guatemala a little bit. I was going to say that it wasn't just the exports that were a factor, but it was the barter systems that I think that some of the capitalist systems or whatever had a problem with. But then I was going to say also that more kind of recent in the conversation, there was a point where you said that they're not interested in setting up democracies; they're interested in setting up things they control, and it's like a factor of that or something. I was going to just add on to there, and then of course that goes with the military. Senior military for that too, maybe. And then I think the gentleman just spoke before, he was saying socialism in reference to pre-World War II, but I think even Nazism took on a different, or whatever the Nazis were exactly. I'm not exactly sure, but because I don't know that part of history perfectly, precisely, but it's basically I don't think it was quite the same until a bunch of stuff escalated. So I guess I was going to talk about that because I never really reflected on that until this conversation today, how much it really is, I guess, because in some way I disregard the terms and the labels that we put on things okay, communism, socialism, kind of try to look at it for what it is, but it is significant, and I think I want to see it as a will or a gesture to try to be sort of accepted. And now that might not be just all wholesome. I think originally, and a big part of sort of, let's call it communism, was to sort of the whole world would become communist. And from what I understand it, for like the last 20, 30 years, that's not really been actually believed in by peoples there, even though they might say it and pay lip service to that. We all have our sacred cows and stuff. Anyway, I'm rambling. But I think there was diversity in Christianity, Islam, and like democracies, different democracies, and like so why not like there be different, and so that could be another reason why they made it like socialism, because like it implies like flexibility or like malleability, like they can kind of it's what they say it is and interpret it as, even respecting the like foundation of where it came from in their systems, like for example within China and Russia. But yeah, I think I got most of the points I want to make.
So it's very interesting because that's kind of my takeaway from the use of terms. And the reason why terms are important, not for you and I, but it's important for the intelligence apparatus and our governments to control us. They have to control language. And so they label people in order to control people. So that's why understanding what they're doing, what their labels are, and how those labels are used to control us is so important. And that was kind of one of our first big epiphanies, is that the use of labeling, calling us conspiracy theorists or whatever, is critical to their being able to control us. And I said just recently that the collective of us together that have woken up from this control mechanism needs to laugh at them. We need to laugh at them hard. We need to lean into this labeling of us, because it's all bullshit. And once you realize, and that was kind of a real epiphany for me, that the use of the word communism was part of a psychological operation and a kinetic one. They used the label communist to assassinate people. They used the label communist to attack entire countries. And in the early 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, they added the word to the National Security Action Directive memorandum, terrorist. And that's why it's critical, the use of this labeling of the word terrorist. That's why they had to label people as domestic terrorists, because it authorizes by a covert memorandum the assassination. That's how Barack Obama covered his ass in droning Americans in Yemen, because they had labeled them under a generic behavioral pattern a terrorist, and they could literally take out whoever they wanted, wherever they wanted. And so it's critically important that you understand why they use particular words. But for the normal person on the street, the terms that they have created, to us, everyone should be watching behavior and not a label in order to form our own opinions. And so, yeah, that's absolutely critical. And at the end of the day, it goes back to the same thing. It doesn't matter if you're talking about Marx or Lenin or any of the people at the very beginning of this. They were all bought and paid for by the same people. You go back to the Fabian Society, it talks about this entire play that, and I don't mean like a movie, the entire script that is being ran on all of this, the globalization, the interbreeding of people from different countries, forced migration, all of that stuff. It was all planned. They talk about it in their own words. They talk about leaving Africa as a perpetual slave colony for the rest of them. Yes, at some point you're going to have to pretend like colonialism is gone, but we're going to enslave them in other ways. And that's why they set up the World Bank and all of that other stuff. So bringing all of that to closure and derailing their plans is critically important for the survival of all of us. All along, go ahead.
Yeah, Colonel. your comment about, well, in particular, the previous comments about socialism, communism, and how these words are sort of deliberately Venn diagrammed for purposes of cloudiness and obfuscation production. And also, in particular, it raised, in my mind, DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, which, as we know, are beloved cheerleaders of the DNC Corpse Resurrection Society. Bernie Sanders and AOCIA have been cheerleading for, and just at the precise moment where not just like, people who focus on politics more than science, for example, but the general population was starting to say, what the fuck about the corpsocrats? The general population, after losing to Trump, was actually starting to say, are these guys paid to lose? And that's not news to us, but the CIA notices that kind of thing. They don't give a crap what we think, but when it spreads, they care. And so what's made me raise the question of, why do Bernie and AOC call themselves DSA, Democratic Socialists of America? And it's, in a way, it's kind of like,
did you mute? Hold on.
Largely,
you cut out.
It's predicated on this complete division of social history from political history. And what I mean by that is political history, especially, well, first of all, among the entire population, but especially among the Democrats, and arguably even more so on the fake-controlled, compatible left, has been completely erased. What do I mean by that? Howard Dean, 2004. We know that was fake because he was an airbag to put in Skull and Bones carry, but there had to be something to absorb the anger over the Iraq war so the Democrats could lose a crackhead.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
He played the role of an airbag. But both Jesse Jackson's campaigns erased. Both Bernie campaigns erased. Without the complete erasure of U.S. political history, this fake Bernie AOCIA, which is basically keep the dead Democrats alive, keep the illusion that this political party, which is now 100% CIA, which gave the State of the Union platform to a literal CIA. Agent, been flirting with the Senate with CIA agents for so long that this. And the CIA was the assassin of the older Democrats who partly resisted the CIA in partly, this assassination of political history is utterly required for this S&DSA illusion to still be maintained. We have the best means of erasing history that the world has ever seen because they can dodge and burn better for different audiences. And we should, I think one thing that we can all do is not just us know AOC CIA, but spread that, the amazing thread that guy wrote on AOC CIA. We need to spread that everywhere.
So
and we can do so, it's not just us knowing. We got to go for critical mass over here.
Okay, so that's a call to action. Bridget, if you can find, where did Bridget go? Did they drop her again? These assholes.
I don't even see her in here.
All right. So we need to find okay. Let me bring her back up. Bridget, you are SR71. Can you go find the AOC post that All Along was just talking about that has her history of as a CIA asset and put it in the purple pill, please? Because I do, and I did steal this from All Along, in all honesty. I will never write AOC again. It will always be AOCIA. That was classic awesomeness on behalf of All Along. I want everyone from now on, do not ever type AOC without adding an IA to the end of that. So awesome job. Illini, go ahead.
Just following up on some of my comments earlier, what Colonel has done and what Paul Williams have done and what some of these other authors have done has kind of exposed just how much of the division in the political cycle is getting driven by the leadership.
Yes.
And all the people behind the scenes.
Yes.
And how it's very intentional in order to keep themselves in power. And in that aspect, I still think that there's a political cycle. But I also think there's an aspect of what's going on the surface that's just total BS. And that if you can follow all the crimson threads back, you can see who's benefiting from all of it and why they're trying to do this. And I'll bet you one day, historians may, if this whole model, wins, historians one day will be trying to follow all the crimson threads during the U.S. Civil War, too, and what was really going on and driving all that.
So let me make this point, Illini, because I think you kind of hit on the crux of the whole thing. You almost can't have it both ways. If you believe that, and we're living it right now, that the division is driven, and we're watching it, and we've documented that from post World War II until today, it's all been driven. You go back to pre-World War II, and there's strong indications that both World War I and World War II were driven by the same forces, just not neatly tucked into a CIA. So these people that drive these, I don't believe that any of the cycles occur naturally. I honestly do not. And I just base that on going back to the Fabian Society and their massive efforts to plan control. If you go back to 1850 and you read the document that Teddy Roosevelt's cousin wrote, and I'm trying to remember what book that was in. It was in one of Anthony Sutton's books. The socialist nature of the argument, and this is almost 100 years before Roosevelt comes in and writes the socialist plan called the New Deal to implement it. So I believe there are forces. We don't have all of the, I certainly don't have the ability to go back and look at all of the different things that were written at the time, by who they were written, and the actions taken. But I do believe that most of everything that has happened over the last 150 years has not been a natural cycle. It has been a bunch of people that are effecting a plan. That plan got more crystallized in the late 1800s by the Fabian Society, and they've just moved down that track. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what I had said before. And I have written about this, and I've researched this, and Naomi Klein talks about this, an economist that kind of turned crazy environmentalist. She talked about that there isn't, or I'll post in the Purple Pill or something about it. But there isn't socialism. There isn't capitalism. There is an amalgam. And I'll post a video where she talks about this. Everybody is everything. It's like saying a tree is just bark. It's not. It's a lot. Everything is an amalgam. Everything in the world is an amalgam. There's nothing really pure. That's a delusion, and that's something they use to fuck with people. And I just want to throw out another frame out. We and China and Russia live in authoritarian capitalism. It's not socialism. It's not capitalism. It's not democracy. And I'll post in the Purple Pill a book that I read long ago about this. And I just feel like, I'm not talking out of my ass, and I just have to qualify what I say, like everybody else does. I'm fine with that, but oof.
No, nobody said that you were talking out your ass, Carrie. Beam, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I think there's definitely evidence for like you were saying with throwing out like words over and over and over again. Decent people on both sides. It's like a kind of rewriting history right in front of our faces with the power of like certain repeated words, or even just not covered things, like pretending like it doesn't exist.
Right.
And like it's like basically like the Hunter Biden laptop or something is kind of like just be quiet about it, or WikiLeaks is kind of like just be quiet about it. But then at the same time, an immediate like sort of for some reason I want to say the word highfalutin. There's like this immediate like in the next day response where like 17 intelligence agencies and it's all officious. And so I think that like there's this era of like with these catchphrases, they're like really related to like ideologies, and then they want to tell us like don't have ideologies or we're going to police ideologies, and it goes along with censorship. But it's funny because like that would be fine, I think, for me personally, if they were like not spreading ideology themselves and having something.
Correct.
So it's a big problem. I have a big problem personally when they're like taking over, the government. Not only are they obfuscating the narrative, and it's a narrative control, again, back to the control, but it's like a pretext with these, possible perhaps pretext of a threat or some kind of alarm tied with it. But then they're also tasking the labor of law enforcement to do all these sorts of various things. And it's a real slippery slope, I think, and even went into the field of like being, for one party's prerogative. And and then like, of course, never would be acknowledged. And it's really a weird, messed up time if you don't I personally think like lots of Democrats don't know what world they live in, personally, but I don't want to make it a party thing.
I agree. So we're over time. I'm going to let SR 71 close us out, and then we're going to say goodbye. Go ahead, SR.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank everybody for showing up today. It's been awesome. I did post that link to the thread from Edward Bernays concerning AOC and her.
Who? Wait a minute.
AOCIA.
Come on, SR 71, get with it.
DERNAYS. He goes as rap game Edward Bernays.
Okay. I appreciate
it. He's the one that posted a long thread about AOC being CIA.
Yes.
I posted that link here in the pill. I also posted the link
on Rumble. Yeah. I thank you very much.
So.
Oh, and I'm going to steal SR 71's line. Make sure if you're on Rumble to give us a thumbs up. Also, I'm going to do my daughter a favor and tell everyone to go to Shopify and look up the Colonel's Corner so you can contribute to our book fund. And an update on, we did get the money transferred, and I will be spending this weekend going over a locally. Go ahead, Bridget.
I was just going to ask, because I was asked, what time is going to be your deep dive?
I don't know. I still have to figure that out because I don't know when I'm going to get back from the car show. I have to go talk to my husband. I don't know if there's like a set time that it closes. I want to try to do it tonight. You're talking about the joint deep dive that I want to do and get everybody helping me.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. I'm not sure. It'll probably be around 8:30 or 9 o'clock if we do it tonight. If we do it tomorrow, it would be more likely around like 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. So those are kind of the windows. If I had to guess at this point. But I do want to give you a heads up. Hold on. Let me see if I can find the tab so you guys can cheat and go ahead and look. There is Well, it's not going to let me bring it up. I will do a short post when we're done that kind of gives you an overview of what I was looking at. I don't know why it won't bring it up. Let's see. Hold on just a second. Yeah, I don't know. It'll take too long and I need to run. So I do want to give you guys a heads up, and I will do that. I will do it on a post on X shortly about the topic of conversation, because it's crazy. But anyway, more on that later. Trump frog? Trump frog. He comes up and Stellar
Hey,
goes,
what's up? How are you?
I'm good. I just wanted to say, hey, we were just closing out. I just saw you come up, so wanted to give you a shout out there. Oh, dang.
Oh,
Health and
thank
Wealth is
you.
here too. What the heck? Y'all all coming in.
Happy Friday to you. I hope you're doing good.
I'm doing awesome. Y'all are my after hours crowd here. Holy crap.
I've been in this space for the last hour at least.
Oh, good. All right. You just come up to say hey.
I know there are too many people that were talking, so I'm just gonna let them get their stuff out.
Got it. All right. What happened
to hear from you.
It's great seeing you. Where's Stellar? She just like vanished.
She probably got a phone call. That's what happens with me. I was literally, you're like Trump frog, and my work phone is blowing up. So.
Okay, Health Wealth. How are you?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon. How you doing, man?
I'm awesome.
Blessings to you. I just wanted to say hi. I've been listening to you since you came on. I've been doing house chores before I get ready to go to work. And I just wanted to commend you. Just give you your flowers. I love what you do. And you do nothing but teach me every time. And I appreciate you, man. Just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you. I love seeing you here. Yeah, so I was going to give you a real quick update. This weekend, the funds for my birthday present from all of y'all came over. So I am going to do some shopping, and I will send y'all pictures, and we're going to keep tabs because some of the stuff that I will buy, the gladiolas especially, are bulbs. So I'm going to get them planted once they get in. We're going to keep tabs on the growth of them. And it'll just kind of be a joint project with our group here on the nurturing of this wonderful, totally amazing birthday gift y'all gave me. So I plan on keeping y'all updated and sharing it along the way. I am going to take some of it and spend it at a local nursery here just so we can have some immediate results to brag about. So anyway, just wanted to give you guys an update on that. And thank you again. I am just tremendously humbled by the group that we have here. And it's an honor to do this every day with you guys. And I did want to draw attention to the video that I did shortly before we started. I told you guys yesterday that I wasn't able to make the space because I went and gave a briefing of Gladio 101 to a local group. There was about 40 people in the crowd, and it was in Lake Wells, about an hour from here. And one of the people that came to the Badland fan club had invited me to this group. They meet every Thursday. So I drove down there, my husband and I did, and I got through the briefing. It was about an hour and a half long, kind of just talking about all the stuff that we all know now. And the people, of course, were just like mouth hanging open. Oh my God, are you kidding me? Obviously, all of them, it's a conservative kind of group. So they're kind of awake. They weren't not near awake to hear what I had to say. But I mentioned in the video that one of the gentlemen that had taken a seat in the very back of the room stood up, and he said, I just want to tell everybody that everything that she just said was true. He said, and I know that because not only did I work for 4 years inside of the CIA, and I didn't say this in the video because I didn't think it was appropriate, but I'll share it with you guys. he said, I spent 4 years in the CIA. I left there. I worked in the State Department for, like 20 years. He worked in the Pentagon in an intelligence capacity as well. And then he retired and moved down here. So, but he followed that up with saying that, I just want everybody to know that it's not everybody. She's not talking about everybody. And I found that very interesting for a couple of different reasons. Obviously, I'm not talking about everybody because I wasn't in intelligence, but I obviously was in the military, and I didn't know anything about it. And it is completely plausible that people, especially at a junior level, which he obviously was when he was in the CIA, don't know anything about what's going on. And it is possible because of the compartmentalization. And I made this point to everybody that one of the patterns that we noticed early on is there were some very common names in the ambassador side of the house, in the CIA station chief side of the house, in the CIA operative side of the house, that showed up in multiple countries to do regime change and dirty deeds, just in general. So it is a select group of people inside of these apparatuses. And I just found it both affirming and interesting that while acknowledging the fact that all of this stuff goes on, he caveats it with it's not everybody. And the other thing is, someone asked me afterwards, well, why wouldn't somebody like that talk about this stuff? Why is it you? And I said, well, that's an interesting question, because you would think that someone with an intelligence background talking about something like this would be even more convincing. But also, they run a very fine line of being labeled as someone that's divulging classified information, because it wouldn't be hard to set someone else up like that. And that's the point that I made to the person. It is much easier for someone like me, who did not have any access to that type of operations. I didn't work inside the CIA, nor did I work inside of any intelligence capability. So I have no way of being read in on any of those programs. It's much easier for me to make that argument and then have someone like him with the credentials stand up and confirm what I'm telling you is the truth. So I don't hold anything like that against someone like that, because it is much more risky for someone like that to do it. And so that's where we're at. But I really, really enjoyed that. And I would tell anybody that listens to this, if you live within a comfortable driving distance of a couple of hours of Central Florida, I will come and talk to any group of people that is interested in learning about this. I also always talk to you guys, and we will be traveling this summer. We didn't last year because of the birth of my grandchild, but both of the 2 years that we did our big RV trips, I did meet with people that I keep people posted generically, not what park I'm staying in. I'm not that stupid. But generically where I'm at geographically, so that if people do have groups, I know a lot of people are in a lot of clubs and churches and stuff like that. I would be more than happy to come and talk to a group of people. And so just stay tuned for having the ability to do that. I don't have a set. I do know I'm going to be in Texas at the end of June. That's about the only firm date I have set up right now. I will be around Fort Hood, my dear, dear, dear friend that I've mentored for the last 20 years. Just pinned on Colonel a couple of months, last August, because he pinned on Colonel the same week my grandbaby was born. So I wasn't able to go to his promotion ceremony, but he's taken group command at Fort Hood. He's an Air Force officer, and he does the air liaisons with Army, like calling in fire and stuff like that. That's what his job has been for like the last 15 years. And he's taking group command at Fort Hood of the air component there. And so I'm going to make I'm going to do everything I can to get out there for his change of command ceremony. So anyway, that's about the only thing we have set up at this point. And that's the last week of June. And I will be in the Austin area because my daughter's there. I'm not going to go to Texas without going up to see my daughter. So that's what I know at this point, but I will keep you posted on that as well. So again, thanks everybody for being here. Appreciate it. And I will post later at a finite time on when we're going to do a group dig. And I will have to have it set up. We're probably, I'm going to have to simultaneously do this, but actually a live Rumble as well. So I can screen share stuff. I'm not exactly technically sure how that's all going to work out, but we'll figure it out. Because I need to be able to talk to you guys while at the same time I'm showing slides on Rumble. So if possible, you guys are going to need to be able to see both of those things so we can go over the information together and share links and stuff like that. So anyway, that's the heads up. Thanks for being here, everybody. Take care. Have a nice weekend if I don't see you before Monday. Okay, back here. Let me get this minimized. Oh. So where it cut off, I came back and it said, oops, it was lost. So, and the live chat's gone. But anyway, thanks everybody for being here. I'll see you this weekend.